What's up, everybody? It's Joe with Joseph Blake Photography. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the Canon released firmware updates for the EOS R3, R5, and R6, 1.2, 1.21. We're going to be talking about firmware updates. All right, everybody, before we jump into the firmware updates, just a quick plug for the channel. If you go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the like button, I promise you're going to like what you have to see. I've been making some changes to the channel. I'm back, and I'm going to be trying to update this channel and add more content soon, so continue to watch for that. Today, we're going to be talking about Canon firmware updates, and we'll go through some of the updates that we've already seen, and then I am going to update the R6 that I'm recording on right now, and we're going to test out and see if it fixes the dreaded Canon wobble, which is the primary item that is listed for this camera. And also, I'm going to see if it helps with any of the overheating, which is something that they advertised for the R5 and the speed increase for the R3. So let's jump into what those firmware updates have on them. All right, so first let's take a look at the EOS R3 and what they have done and how to get to these firmware updates. So right now I am on the USA Canon website, and we're going to go ahead to drivers and downloads, and then we're going to go ahead and click on firmware. And you'll see right there we've got the firmware update 1.2.1 for macOS and Windows. Now, this was originally announced as the 1.2 update, and then they immediately pulled the 1.2 update. And I heard two different kind of conflicting bits of information on why 1.2 got pulled. One was that the cameras were not storing custom settings after shutdown with the new firmware. And the second was that there was an issue with some of the dials not responding properly to action. I don't know if those two things were connected, but they quickly released an update. So props to Canon for doing that really fast. And let's go ahead and take a look at the update itself, and we're going to go ahead and look at the details. So if we scroll down through here, the details, we can see number one, it's a 90 megabyte download released on July 29th, and it incorporates everything from previous versions. So number one on the 1.21 update for the R3 is the ability to set a custom high-speed continuous mode. This is like a burst mode, like a super burst mode, where it will shoot up to 50 images, and you can set this in the settings, at up to 30 to 195 frames per second. So in the settings, you can actually tell it, I want to shoot 195 frames a second for 50 images. So it's only going to shoot for a quarter of a second, but for that quarter of a second, you're going to get 195 images. That is crazy. They're also adding the full HD 1080p 240 frame per second option and a 200 frame per second option. I'm sure that's depending on if you're shooting in NTSC or PAL, as well as depth compositing for focus bracketing. So you can actually do depth compositing inside of the camera and focus bracketing with a flash. That seems awesome. Time-lapse recording now added, and the ability to shoot cloud raw processing. So if you haven't used the Canon Cloud or the Canon, I think it's image.cloud or canon.image, their remote app, you can now do cloud raw processing. Now this is a paid service where they want you to transfer your images up to the cloud to access them, and you're going to pay for effectively storage. And if you do that, then you're going to have to continue to pay them to access those images. They've also added the ability to convert HEIF or HEIF, high efficiency image format images into JPEG. If you recall, the HEIF image format allows for more compression. It's using HEVC compression. The iPhone shoots with that HEIF standard. But now you can actually convert those to JPEG on camera if you're going to be exporting those or transferring them to a place where HEIF is just not. There's additional authentication certificates available for WPA2 enterprise-based Wi-Fi connections for those of you working in the enterprise. There are also performance enhancements, and this is the big thing for the R5 and the R6 as well, and I'll be testing this on the R6 in just a minute. The ability to improve the performance of the digital IS or digital image stabilization so that you don't get as much of that wobble effect when you're doing kind of a walk and talk or a selfie style video. So we're going to test that on the R6 because that item is also on the R6. It fixed an issue with shutdown errors, added a power off temp standard high menu to still shooting, and fixed a bunch of kind of random issues. Oh, here's another fun one. They added a mechanical shutter sound. So if you're using the electronic shutter, it'll still make the clicky clacky sound. If you have to have the sound. We're going to put in EOS R3. You don't know how to find your firmware. This is how you do that. You type in the name, you go to drivers and downloads, you go to firmware, and then there is our 1.6 update. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to go to software details. 62 meg in this case, so about 2/3 the size. And if we go through here, this is one thing immediately that's on here that is a little different from the R3, which is, we know that the R5 has a compact body style, whereas the R3 is much larger with that more professional body and the built-in grip. The R5 was plagued with, or supposedly plagued with, overheat issues in the beginning. As they've released more and more updates to the R5 and the R6, I think what we're realizing is that it wasn't as big a concern as Canon made it out to be, and they may have really hamstrung themselves in the beginning with the software and the kind of protections that they put in place for the R5 and the R6 to keep it from overheating, when really it seems more and more now like they're just kind of loosening the reins, or maybe they've just gotten better at getting those Digic X chips to not overheat with these other progressive improvements in software. But here's what it does. It improves, it adds the ability in the menu to add power off temp high standard as high when selected or standard. So basically the camera won't auto shut off unless it's either standard, which is pretty much, I assume, where you would have been with the previous 1.5 firmware, or high, meaning it'll give you a little bit more leeway before it'll shut the camera completely down. You'll have more time to shoot before running into high temperature issues. It won't automatically turn off. But of course it says here the bottom of the camera might get hot. Well, that makes sense. You're letting it get hotter, so it might get hotter. Next is that same ability to convert the HEIF images to JPEGs, enhancing the digital IS and minor fixes. So that's pretty much it. We've got the ability to manipulate the kind of tolerance of the overheat shutdown, and the same HEIF conversion and digital IS changes in the R5. Notably missing is the 240 frame per second slow-mo mode and that high frame rate 195 frame per second shooting for up to 30 seconds. Of course, they're using the same chip. It's still the Digic X in both the R3 and the R5, but the R3 has that stacked sensor, so the assumption is that the speed at which that sensor can handle output is much faster. The R5 just wouldn't be able to do that kind of speed. Okay, now let's check the R6 and see what that update looks like. EOS R6. That's the camera that I am shooting on right now. And we're going to go down to drivers and downloads, firmware, and R6 1.6, and drivers and software details. All right, 57 megabytes, almost as big as the R5, slightly less. Let's take a look. Adds the ability to convert HEIF images to JPEGs, got it, and the digital IS stabilization, and minor fixes. Noticeably absent are the high-speed frame rate shooting, which makes sense, considering the fact that it does not have the same sensor as the R3 with all that speed. But interestingly, it doesn't have the overheat. Now, the R6 has not had anywhere near the same types of issues as the R5 with overheating. But it does have a timer, it does have the countdown, and there are times when, especially if I'm shooting outdoors, and I live in Las Vegas, so it gets kind of warm here. I think it would have been nice to have the ability to increase that, considering the fact that the chip and the body are almost identical on the R6 as it is on the R5. So really my assumption is that that's either just not an issue with the R6, that the tolerances are actually already at that high level for the R6 than they were with the R5, or they're just choosing to software gatekeep that with just the R5 and say, okay, the R5 can be a longer shooting hot camera. Also absent something that everybody would like is the removal of the 29-minute record time, the 30-minute record time on both the R5 and the R6, which is still here. Not on the R3, but still here in these other two cameras. Okay, let's go ahead and test out the wobble on this camera, and then we'll do the firmware update. Okay, so I am back here in my kind of backyard, back garden area, and we are going to kind of walk around and see how the wobble is with the current firmware. So I'm on 1.52 on the R6, and I am just kind of spinning around, getting dizzy, letting my arm get tired as I kind of move around with the camera. My hope is that we get a little bit of wobble. I do have that IS set to standard, the digital IS, because this lens does not have IS on it. It's actually a completely standard or completely manual lens. It doesn't even have autofocus or image stabilization. So I plug that in for standard IS and hoping that we'll get some wobble. We'll get some wobble. To show a difference here. I'm going to go ahead and walk into this kind of tight space back here. And hopefully this will be a good place to kind of test, kind of wobble my hand around. Again, this update is specifically designed for this type of shooting where you have, walk and talk selfie, point the camera at your face, style stuff. So hopefully this will represent an improvement once we get the firmware update. So now I am going to go ahead and select this update to download. I have read and agreed to the terms. And now that is going to download onto my system. Okay, so we went ahead and mounted that DMG file that we downloaded, the EOS R6 version 1.6 for Mac firmware update. And this is what's inside that, that file. We've got the firmware update right here, the .fir file, and the update procedure folder, which includes all of the details that you're going to need to follow in various languages. I strongly encourage anyone who's going to be doing this to make sure that you are following these instructions. Okay, so we've got the EOS R6 here, and what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to open up the card slot here, and I'm going to go ahead and put the card in. It doesn't matter which slot you put it in. In this case, we're doing a SanDisk 128 gig card. All right, so we're going to go over to menu, and now we are going to, my son is having a fit downstairs. Okay, so we're going to head over to the little gear icon here, and then you're going to go down to format card, and it's going to ask you which card. We've only put one card in, so we're going to hit OK. And there, it's formatted the card. That's all you need to do. Then remove the card and put it back in your computer. And what we're going to do is we're going to just take that FIR file and just drag it straight over to that card. And we can confirm that it is in the root directory. It's got to be in the root directory. Don't put it in one of these two folders. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and eject. And we're just going to go ahead and put it right back in, like so. Okay, so now we're going to go back into the geared icon, and under sub-tab number 5 here, you're going to see that there is a firmware button. And the firmware button tells you what version of the firmware we have right now. Right now I'm on version 1.4. I know I haven't updated It's been a while, okay? I've been busy. I had a kid. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and tap on this one, and we're gonna hit OK. And what it's gonna do is it's gonna go find the file that's in the SD card, that firmware update file, and it's gonna run it. So it's telling us that please select new version, current version 1.4. We want the 1.6 version. Okay, I guess you have to hit the set button. And now it's gonna update. All right, then we're gonna hit OK. And now we should be on. Press the menu button. You can see we are on version 1.6. Okay, so back outside and checking out the updated firmware. So now I'm gonna move around just as much as I did, but now we are on the 1.6 firmware. I still have the image stabilization set to standard, not enhanced, and I am still using the same lens, 14 millimeters, no autofocus, no IS, nothing. Everything is reliant on the sensor and the digital image stabilization built into the camera. The sun has come out just a little bit today. The sun has come out just a little bit today, and so it might be just a little bit brighter, but we're gonna see how this looks. Still in my back garden here. Look at my flowers. Look at these. They're blowing up. They're huge. This is a tiny bush 3 months ago. I think I might be overwatering them. Okay, so now I'm gonna walk back into that kind of other area here where we were before. We'll see whether or not that still being just as shaky, moving around just as much. We'll see if that changes any of that wobble or if anything feels more or less stable with the 1.6 update. All right, let's go take a look at the footage. So for my initial looks, definitely an improvement, though still getting some of that geometric distortion in the edges, in the corners especially, but it is significantly reduced and it is far less noticeable just to the naked eye as you're moving around, it would seem. I appreciate if you've been subscribed to the channel. If not, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I'd appreciate it if you give this video a like. Thank you so much for all of your support, and have a wonderful day.